What's up guys, I'm Ivan Calderon and welcome to part 3 of the How to Make a Beat series. Today, we're talking all about arrangement. So last week we laid the foundation, which pretty much for me translates to creating the main part of the beat. Now this week we're gonna take it a step further and I'm gonna take that one section and create a full-blown beat out of it. Now it's important to note here that a lot of genres have their own very specific song structures, but to bring it back home, in hip hop, usually you have a 4 to 8 bar intro, a 16 bar verse, an 8 bar hook, and then it just repeats. So that's the structure I'm gonna be using today. So let's jump right in. Okay, so before we begin, let's recap real quick what we made last week. Perfect. So we're going to be taking that section and making a full beat out of it. Now for this video, I will be using the arrangement tool feature that Studio One has. If you're a Studio One user and you don't know what this feature is, I recently did a video on my top 3 features of this program where I talk about this in depth, so definitely check it out. I'm going to link it up here somewhere. Now going forward, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a skeleton. I'm going to create that intro, verse, hook pattern that I talked about, so let's do that now. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and click on this little Tetris button here, which opens up the arranger window. I'm gonna hit the command key on my Mac keyboard, that brings up my pen tool, and I'm gonna go ahead and just drag. Now by default, that created an intro label, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna right click and change this to hook. Now this is only a 4 bar loop, so I'm gonna hit the FN and Option keys on my Mac keyboard, click and drag to duplicate. I'm gonna delete the last half of that label and then just drag this over. Perfect. So from here, like I said, I'm gonna create that basic skeleton of the intro, verse, and the hook. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drag this over about 4 bars because that's how long I want my intro to be. So I'm gonna label that. I'm gonna change this to intro. And then from here, I'm gonna drag this again. So 4, 8, 12, 16. Scoot that back because I want this section here to be my verse. So we're gonna label that verse. And then from here, I'm gonna take this whole section, this label section, again, hit the FN key and Option key, drag that over. Then I'm gonna do the same thing for my hook, drag it over. Then I'm gonna take another 4 bars here to create a little change up, which I'm gonna call a bridge. And then we're gonna end with 2 hooks. Boom. So that basically is the skeleton that I'm gonna be using for this beat, but now we gotta talk about this intro. So for the intro, basically what you're aiming for is to kind of give people a preview of what the beat is gonna be without giving them everything all at once. So for me, that usually kind of resorts back to maybe adding like a piano or the sample by itself. You don't necessarily wanna have any leads in there just yet. Again, this is to taste and for preference, but what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna take our sample, which is this here, and our roads, and I'm gonna make those the intro. So I'm gonna go ahead and drag them over, boom, roads, boom, and essentially our intro sounds like this. So that should give people enough of a preview of what's to come without giving them everything that the beat has to offer. All right, now for the verse. In the verse, you have to be super mindful because you don't necessarily want to have everything that was in the hook be in the verse for 3 reasons. 1, if you were to just take the hook part and loop it all the way to the end, you'd have a very monotonous, very boring beat and no one wants to listen to that. 2, when I try to create music personally, my goal is to make people feel something, to kind of evoke an emotion. And I do that by manipulating energy and dynamics, and ultimately that is a result of either taking things away or adding things back in, which we'll talk about in a minute. But 3, and most importantly, you want to carve out a space where the artist can do their thing. You don't want to have every element, again, that was in the hook be in the verse, because then that would compete with the artist, that would compete with the singer. So you want to kind of create that space for them to live and to do what they do best. Okay, so with that in mind, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy over some drums. Now in Studio One, we have these handy folders that you can put your files under, but the reason this is so useful is because it kind of creates this single file block that I can then copy over, and it copies everything that's in that folder. So I'm gonna do that for 3 more times to kind of create that 16 bar verse. I missed one. Here we go. So it sounds like this. Now that sounds good, but I want to take it a step further. Now when it comes to transitioning between pieces of a beat, whether it be a verse or a hook or an intro, my goal is to make the people aware based on what they're listening that it's a different section. So I want you to know just by listening to my beat that something is different. This is no longer the hook. This is no longer the verse. This is no longer the intro. This is something different. And again, you do this by taking things away or adding them back in and controlling that energy. Now, a simple trick to do this is to manipulate your hi-hats. Now, the hats in a beat are probably one of the more prominent elements along with the snare because they drive the tempo. So if you were to take hi-hats and you were to add more of them like a roll, it would kind of feel more of a sped up kind of feel. If you were to take some away, maybe like have them in eighth notes or fourth notes, it would sound more slowed down and laggy. So use that to your advantage. So with that being said, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in here in my close hat section and I'm gonna take, and it sounds like this. Let me show you guys first. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take out every other hat. So boom, boom, take these away, just to kind of create that feeling that I'm going for. And essentially that ends up sounding like this. So as you guys just saw, I only do that for the first 4 bars of the verse because I want it to be a gradual rise in the beat. The intro is kind of mellow, it's kind of introducing you to the beat, then the verse drops in, nice and mellow hats, and then on the 5th bar, it transitions back into our normal beat. Okay, so the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take away some of these toms because for me, these were transitional pieces. I don't wanna have them throughout the entire verse. I only want them here at bar 5, which I'll explain in a minute, and then introducing the hook. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this away, and I'm also gonna take the crashes in the middle. So that should sound like this. As you guys heard, there's that gap there because I took some drums out so I'd be able to put the toms in. So what I'm gonna do to fix that is I'm gonna go in here right about in the middle of this section. I'm gonna chop this up, delete it, duplicate the first half, and that should sound like this. Perfect transition. Cool, so let's go ahead and duplicate that for that second part. Bam, there it is. And now again, we only have the toms here and introducing the hook. Perfect, so now at this point, all we need is just some melodic content. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the sample and the rows and just kind of duplicate them throughout the entire beat. Boom, 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 and that should sound like this. And then I want here to be a change up, which we did with the hi-hats. Now the next trick that I'm gonna show you guys to kind of allow people to feel like there's something different happening is to manipulate the bass. Now the bass is one of those elements that you don't necessarily hear, but you really feel. So whenever you take it away, people know that something different just happened. So then what I like to do is I like to take my bass and I introduce it on the 5th bar of my verse, which is why I also take away some of the hats in the beginning and I wanted that tom piece to introduce it. So I'm gonna duplicate that real quick and then let you guys hear. Perfect. So this should sound like this from the intro. So we got something just nice and slow, and it's about to ramp up at bar 5. So as you guys can see, you really have control over what you want the people to feel based on what you take away and what you put back into your beat. Now, the next thing that I tend to do to my verses is to introduce a new instrument, change the drum pattern, or both, and that happens right about halfway through because I want to make sure I keep people's attention. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to take this lead, which we had in the hook, and it sounds like this. And I'm going to go ahead and just bring it over and place it right in the middle of the verse. So from here, it should sound like this. And here he comes. So again, the goal is to make sure your listener is engaged and entertained from the beginning till the end of the beat. Now you could leave your verse there and it would be a fantastic verse, but I like to take it a step further. So the next thing I do, and really the last thing I do to my beats, is I kind of take some things away from the end of the verse leading into the hook, because again, I want people to know something different is coming. So the way I do that is right around maybe like 2 bars before the hook, I start to take things away. So I'm gonna take away the, let's say, kick, snare, closed, and open hat, pull those back up a bit, And you might have to play with this. You might have to kind of listen and see where yours might fit better, but let's take a listen. Okay, I lied. I kind of want it here instead. A bar before the hook. So let's listen. And I want an extra kick there just to kind of finish off that section, and it should sound like this. Perfect. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take out the bass, because again, that bass is important for energy switches. So right around where the toms start, I'm going to go in here and just take out my bass. So boom and boom. And that transition section should sound like this. Perfect. So from here, all we do is literally just copy. So take that verse, that label, hit the FN key, Option key, replace this here. There it is. Now for the bridge, I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna take whatever was in the intro and I'm gonna just drag it over, relabel that real quick into bridge. And I might, yeah, I'll take the lead just to kind of introduce a familiar element in that breakdown section, and probably a tom to kind of have that transition piece. So that sounds like this. So this piece just kind of gives you a break. And then from here, I just kind of let it ride out. After the second hook, I just kind of fade things, and that's about it. But all right, guys, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you learned something. I think the biggest takeaway for this video for you is to remember that you are in control of how you make your listeners feel. Just because things are repetitive and I guess computer programmed, they don't have to be monotonous. They don't have to be boring. Take things away, add things back, create that emotion, create those dynamics that allow people to feel something, because that should be the goal. Now, next week, we're going to be going over mixing and mastering, so you do not want to miss that. I know for me, that was probably the hardest thing about making a beat, because I didn't know how to use tools like reverb and EQ and all that stuff, but I'm going to be showing you guys how I personally mix my beats, so do not miss it. Anyways, that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you're not already, but I will see you guys on the next one.